So, as it turns out, my little investigation became a trilogy of videos. Didn't plan that, that's just how it ended up. And here we are on the final round, and I am faced with the particular challenge of running through these last few pieces of expanded media, arguably the most interesting yet, in a kind of rapid linear fashion whereby I don't waffle on too much, because if I did, this video would be an hour long and nobody wants that. Greetings, distinguished followers, Chosen Chimp here. We are of course talking about examples of the Third Doctor facing Cybermen. Something which only happened in TV Doctor Who once, and in my first video I explained how I don't really consider that as a legitimate form of Pertwee's Doctor encountering Cybermen, really. If you haven't seen my first two videos, please check them out before we get on to this one, and without further ado, let's talk about this. So for this final round, I'm going to shake things up a little bit, and I'm not going to talk about these in the order in which they were released. I am instead going to talk about them in the order in which they were experienced through the eyes of the Third Doctor himself. And this means I get to save what I consider to be the best piece of expanded media concerning the Third Doctor versus Cybermen until the very last. Before I get to those whopping Big Finish releases, we're going to make a quick visit to the world of reading in the form of The Scientific Secrets of Doctor Who, a compendium of short stories by various authors, some of which you may already heard of. And we have a credit to a one Mr. Simon Guerrier, who I assume is the kind of editor-in-chief of this book. Simon Guerrier is a name which will crop up again later on in this video. But this is The Scientific Secrets of Doctor Who. It was released in 2015, and I'm going to be talking about The Piper by Mark Morris. And thank you ever so much to Samuel Evans 4659 for bringing this short story to my attention, because without you, I would have missed this completely, and this is a legitimate Third Doctor Cybermen encounter, and it concerns it's another post-invasion aftermath story, much like Bluetooth, which I covered in my first video. And this is where there is a Cyberman who is roaming around in the sewers of London, as they do. And this particular Cyberman, he's a bit battered and bruised after the invasion and the battle, and he is making plans to resurrect the Cyber Army, and he's got a few tricks up his sleeve that we've never really experienced before, not in kind of mainstream Doctor Who Cybermen storytelling. It's not Cybermats, it's Cyber Rats and Cyber Worms. Okay, so this Cyberman is hiding in the sewers, and he is basically spreading the cyber influence by creating an army of cyberdized rats who then kind of swarm over their hapless victims. And when you're swarmed over by these rats, you'll come out the other side covered in bits of cyber circuitry. And there's also worms, cyber worms, that will infect you like parasites. They'll get in your nose and your ears and your mouth. And the same thing happens. You get covered in this kind of cyber circuitry, and you are haplessly devoted to the cyber cause, and you will walk around zombie-like. As I said in my last video, I like it when they actually shake up the rules of how Cybermen work. After all, each generation of Cyberman, as we learned, operates differently. They have different techniques. Some of them hatched out of eggs, for crying out loud. So in this, we've got the utilization of local kind of vermin and parasite life forms, and it's just cool. This is a very short story. It's quite simple in terms of writing and narrative, but it's good fun. And the Third Doctor is being very Third Doctor. It's not the only example in this video of when the Third Doctor comes face to face with a Cyberman and says, there, old chap," which is a vintage Third Doctor line. And I like the way that he addresses Cybermen with that cool level of composure, especially when that Cyberman is down and out and the Doctor knows he doesn't have to do much to defeat this Cyberman. Rather than going all out and killing the creature, he tries to negotiate and have a conversation, and there's just that little bit of Third Doctor empathy. It's very three-dimensional, I find. So in this short story, there doesn't seem to be any point where the Doctor actually explains to Jo Grant what what Cybermen are. So I'm going to headcanon that and assume that Joe Grant already knows about Cybermen, which means this story must surely be set after Tyrants of Logic, even though that was released quite a few years later. But so this is kind of, this is how I like to continue the chronology. So we have Bluetooth with Liz Shaw, then we had Tyrants of Logic with Joe Grant, and then we have The Piper with Joe Grant. So whilst the Doctor and Joe are facing this knackered Cyberman in the sewers of London, Unit are tasked with fending off this cyberdized zombie-esque outbreak in a hospital, which means, of course, I am very proud to introduce another edition of Unit Doing Stuff. Today, fighting. Sergeant Benton knew the situation was hopeless, but there was no way he would ever give up. It simply wasn't in his nature. He would keep fighting until he could fight no longer, even if, in this instance, fighting meant running away. So, what I like about this is there's a kind of reinvention of how Cybermen contaminate other people because they don't have a conversion chamber, but their motto is "we will survive," and this is how they survive. They use worms and rats. And obviously the plans are thwarted, and the Doctor and the Brigadier have a big blowout at the end because the Brigadier takes what is left of the cyber technology and sends it off to some big research complex, and the Third Doctor is like, no, don't do that because it's still cyber technology, therefore it's dangerous, and then the story ends. So it's got a little bit of that emotional ambiguity that I kind of like at the end of a Cyberman story. Good stuff, great story, The Piper, check it out. Okay, so that's that in the bag. As I was recording this, there was a little rattle of the postbox downstairs. I went downstairs and look what I found. And this is, I already opened this once. Okay, this is kind of like take two because I kind of got a bit lost on the first take. But check this out. This just came through the door. All right. This is my next piece of Third Doctor versus Cyberman related expanded media that I'm going to talk about. This by default has to be the final pit stop of the Third Doctor versus Cybermen with his companion Joe Grant. But no, this is not Joe Grant, this is Joe Jones, and would you believe it, this is set after the Green Death. The Doctor says goodbye to Joe Grant in a very poignant parting of ways in the Green Death, and Big Finish picks up the ball, and basically as soon as the Doctor leaves, at some point after that, before he meets Sarah Jane Smith in The Time Warrior, Joe Grant from the future, who is now Joe Jones because she's married with great grandkids, comes back into the fold. And that happens in a Big Finish story that I haven't listened to. I just kind of read up on it to get up to speed as to what the dickens was going on here. But this is Quintessence. This is a Third Doctor and Joe Jones story starring Katie Manning, who, as a lady of her particular age, doesn't have to pretend that she is a young 20-year-old in her recordings. She can fully embrace the wonderful age of maturity that she has reached as a person and an actress. So had I decided to make this trilogy of videos this time last year, then the Quintessence would not have been included, because this didn't come out until fairly recently, in October of 2024. Given some of the gothic nuances of this story, I suspect that maybe this was meant to be a kind of Halloween-themed release. But more crucially for the purposes of this topic, and even more crucially for the purposes of this particular video, it is very special indeed. Not only because it contains the Third Doctor encountering Cybermen, but it is also the Third Doctor setting foot on MONDAS. Can you believe that? This is a MONDAS story. The Third Doctor setting foot on MONDAS. How many other Doctors have had that privilege? One, maybe two? So the Quintessence is written by Lauren Mooney and Stuart Pringle and tells the story of a seemingly Victorian mansion which, strangely enough, is stranded on the Navarra Reach in the 42nd century. Wholly inappropriate, as this is a stormy, barren wasteland of a planet. Emmeline Pepperdine is a sickly child with some profound psychic powers and reaches out to Jo Jones via the medium of dreams to lure her and the Doctor onto this planet. Nothing is what it seems. This isn't a mansion at all. It's a spaceship from the deep future, and this is a family who are doing whatever they can to survive, and that is when their plight is exploited by the Mondasian Cybermen, who have found a rather diabolical way of changing the future history of their world to create a new existence of Cybermen on Mondas, whereby their planet doesn't explode, which we all know it does. Now, I wouldn't say the Quintessence is my favourite Cyberman story. I don't dislike it either. It's got a lot of working parts to it, and it's very New Who at its heart. Its narrative structure and its themes, there's a real kind of revival Doctor Who pulse to it, I think, but it just so happens to be a third Doctor story. I mean, actually, it's more of a kind of Jo Jones story. The majority of it is set through her perspective, and she kind of plays the main character in this, really, which is fine, but the Mondasian stuff is excellent. You see Mondas on all these paintings in the mansion with all these little silver figures, and obviously from the get-go you know that they're Cybermen, and when they land on Mondas, when they finally get there through a portal, they enter a complete and utter industrial wasteland where factories and smog and lightning reign supreme, and any form of humanity or niceness is completely dead and buried. They go into this underground precinct where there are the remnants of shops with a kind of 1950s-esque vibe to them, which leads me to assume that this is a direct blood brother sequel to Spare Parts in essence. It certainly doesn't follow on from Genesis of the Cybermen. So I wonder if there are some more kind of nuanced Easter eggs which pertain to Spare Parts. You'd have to listen to both of those stories back to back to figure out if there are any of those, but there are kind of references to the kind of world that was introduced to Spare Parts. Turns out Emmeline has been taken into custody by the Mondasian Cybermen and hardwired into their archives to become a brand new cyber planner. One whose psychic abilities allows her to see into the future and calculate every single permutation of Mondas's future. So obviously they see that Mondas is destroyed, and now they have the opportunity to alter the future and change the course so that Mondas survives, giving brand new credence to the term "we will survive." And this in itself is a really interesting concept, and arguably the most fascinating parts of this story are towards the end when Jo Grant gets hooked up into the cybercomputer where Emmeline keeps her captive, and she has to repeat this same process of attempting to escape from her own dreams over and over and over, and it's just cool. It doesn't always make sense, the morality doesn't always pay off, it gets wrapped up into a neat little bow a bit too much, but at its core, atmospherically, this is a great story, and I'm probably going to listen to it again at some point. The Nicholas Briggs depiction of Mondasian Cybermen is an absolute treasure, and the soundscapes and the music of this really, really brings you into the dilapidated, broken industrial wasteland of Mondas in a way that no other story has had the opportunity to do so. And the fact that it's the third Doctor setting foot on the ground of Mondas, the one who has probably had the least encounters with Cybermen of all the Doctors in history, except maybe William Hartnell himself. Not a perfect adventure, but excellently produced, a superb geek-out fest for Cybermen nerds like me, and a more than worthy edition of the third Doctor encountering Cybermen. The chimp approves. However, when you listen to this story and break it down, there's only one real sort of tangible moment where the third Doctor is face to face with a Cyberman, and it is when this particular Cyberman is almost regaining their humanity. So in terms of these actual nuanced encounters where the third Doctor is face to face with the big silver nasties, again, it's sort of ever so slightly a bit of a misfire, and it's fine because it makes up for it in other capacities. So thanks to the world of Doctor Who expanded media, it turns out that the Third Doctor actually had lots of encounters with the Cybermen. And we have covered them from A to B to my knowledge, starting with his first encounter in Bluetooth with Liz Shaw, all the way along to his encounter post-Green Death with Jo Jones. But what about his next companion, Sarah Jane Smith? And this is where our investigation concludes, because I have one more big finish release to talk about. And this one is set chronologically after all of the others. This is one where the Doctor and Sarah Jane face the Cybermen in a crisis situation like never before. This is Scourge of the Cybermen. I like Scourge of the Cybermen. I like Scourge of the Cybermen a lot. So first of all, this is totally different to all the other Big Finish releases that I have covered, because this is not a full cast audio drama. This is an audio novel. John Coleshaw narrates the story, and he also voices the Third Doctor and other characters in the story too. It contains background music, sound effects, Nicholas Briggs doing the voices of Cybermen. So you have a full audio ensemble to a degree, but the presentation of the story and the narrative is completely different because it is told through the mouth of one narrator. Now, to me, this makes for a much more intimate and engaging experience, and that must be purely subjective. Written by Simon Guerrier, the same guy on the book, Scourge of the Cybermen is confined to one location. It doesn't bounce from pillar to post, just one location in one time, and that is an underwater sea base on a distant planet in the deep future. A team of scientists are working on cultivating the local pollution and turning it into clean energy, and the Doctor is there to help this extremely noble cause. This story benefits from having a very simple setup. It means that the mysteries and the suspense and the tension and the drama has room to grow. Okay, alright, this is something that many stories can learn from, where modern Doctor Who can learn from. Keep the core concept simple, keep the locations simple, keep it confined to one easy to digest place and time, and then you can build so much around it. And this is what that story does. There is a guy in the tunnels and he is sick. Alright, so they go down and investigate and they find out all is not what it seems, and there are two kind of dueling narratives happening in the story at the same time. One is this sickness which seems to be afflicting certain crew members of this base, and the other is the unwanted appearance of, you guessed it, Cybermen. Along with Sarah Jane and the Doctor, listeners are given a fully immersive, fully three-dimensional experience of this sea base, beginning of course with the precincts and the shops and the cafes and all the nice stuff, you know, the kind of public front of it all. But then as the story progresses, you get to go into the subterranean depths, the tunnels, the chasms, the armories, and as you peel back the layers of what this base is made of, you also peel back the layers of the supporting characters involved in it and their particular secrets and their hopes and desires and their dreams. One of the most fascinating locations is this underwater room shrouded in darkness, where there's knee-high water, and coming out of the water is basically a plantation of sunflowers. Obviously this makes for a fascinating visual, and that is one of the key elements that makes this story so amazing, is the way that it paints visuals of these certain places, but also it is a nice little ground zero for spooky goings on involving Cybermen. And the Cybermen themselves, I gotta say, just wow. Who would have thought that a water-based Cybermen adventure would work so flipping well? But the more you think about it, the more it makes sense. You get all these moments in this story of Cybermen swimming and floating in the depths of water, and it evokes the kind of dreamy anti-gravity visuals that you had in those old black and white stories, such as the Moon Base and the Wheel in Space. And the actual aesthetics of Cybermen themselves, again, again, this story nails it, because what you have are Cybermen that are remnants of the Cyber Wars. Yet again, this is a post-Cyber Wars story, set legitimately after the Cyber Wars and the Tyrants of Logic, because both of those things are mentioned in this story. Planet 14 is also referenced, as is the Wheel in Space, so lots of Easter eggs for you to gorge on there. But these are remnants of the Cyber Wars, and as it turns out, much like Tyrants of Logic, there is a whole contingency of humanity whose job it is to ruthlessly kill whatever Cybermen are left. And so what you have here are a different kind of dilapidated Cybermen. They have skirmished this base to a degree, albeit secretly, and you don't get these massive sprawling, sleek silver armies like you do in other Cybermen stories. In this one, you get a small fragmented contingency. In the first half, you only see one or two, and these Cybermen are described to be wasted away, to have been exposed to the elements of the sea. They're covered in barnacles and greenness and rust. They're almost like living wreckage, like the wreckage of ships. Real food for the imagination. And what's ultra sexy about this story is that this is a survival story for Cybermen as much as it is for the human beings on this sea base. The sea base succumbs to damage, and it gradually begins to flood throughout the story, which creates a kind of Poseidon adventure style scenario. And the humans and the Cybermen, they almost come together to create this beneficiary solution whereby the Cybermen can get fresh bodies and also offer the human beings an opportunity for survival, where the only alternative is to either drown or succumb to radiation sickness. And this in turn leads the humans to fall into this kind of hapless mob justice, this realm of aggression and misinformation, the classic thing of human beings getting goaded into a situation through desperation, which from the outside looking in is very perilous indeed. I decided pretty early on when listening to Scourge of the Cybermen that I wasn't going to give away too much of that story for this video. I really want people just to go out and listen to this on their own. It's the best, alright? It's the best Third Doctor versus Cybermen story there is for my money. And there is something about that nautical setting, about the Doctor going around in a submarine, that just perfectly fits the Third Doctor like a glove, in a way that it wouldn't so much of any other Doctor. This is Jon Pertwee's Doctor dream scenario. An underwater Jon Pertwee's Doctor story, but it involves Cybermen. Everything about this works, okay? It just clicks. There is real charisma to the characters. This is the best version of the Third Doctor and Sarah Jane I think the audience can ever get from Doctor Who stories. If atmospherically it's the absolute bomb, the music, description, all of it just comes together so very, very well indeed. And I think if there are writers, both amateur and professional, who would really like to know what constitutes as a good, solid, credible Doctor Who story, then this is one that you must pay attention to. I'm so happy that Scourge of the Cybermen exists, and I would recommend it to everybody who just likes Doctor Who, basically. Flat out. Brilliant stuff. And just what a great way to end my investigation into the Third Doctor versus Cybermen. This was released in 2021, so it comes after, it becomes before the Quintessence, but for my money, this is the absolute apex. This is the culmination of the Third Doctor's journey in his encounter with Cybermen. And that brings my investigation into all of the examples of Third Doctor versus Cybermen to an end. Did I miss any out? I don't think I did. If there are, feel free to chime in the comments, okay? I won't sulk if there are any more that I have missed, because I'll just present them in some other fashion. I might make an aftermath video, or I might present them in the form of a short. Who knows? But if there are any, no matter how obscure, even if it's just a picture of Jon Pertwee standing next to some Cybermen that I haven't encountered, tell me about it. I will bring it to the people in some form or another. So, with that over and done with, how about I start fulfilling those Patreon requests? For just £1 a month, you can become a distinguished follower over on patreon.com/chosenchimp, and you can hit me up in the DMs and request your Doctor Who story for coverage. Your name will be mentioned in these videos, and your contribution to the Chosen Chimp cause will be greatly appreciated. So I look forward to seeing you there, and thank you so much to all of you who have contributed so far. Also, if you want to check me out on social media, please visit my Blue Sky page at thechosenchimp.bsky.social. I also have a TikTok channel which I will be updating at some point. In the meantime, I wish you all the very best. Thank you so much for watching this video. This chimp has been chosen for cyber conversion, unfortunately. So, for the love of Pete and his world, please have a good 'un.